and one of the first responders had a flashlight, and she said, "I see an eye, I see an eye."
But she didn't know if it was a live
She
eye
didn't know
or
if they
just...
were alive.
Hello again, dog lovers. Thanks for coming back to Rescued by a Dog, the podcast about dogs that have actually saved their owners' lives. I'm Laura, and this season of the podcast is entirely listener-supported. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast for as little as $5. First, you could just Venmo me $5 or whatever amount you want to send at the handle Laura Bama. That's Laura, B as in boy, A, M as in mother, A. Or you can go to patreon.com/Rescued by a Dog podcast. Again, that's Patreon, spelled Patreon. So patreon.com/Rescued by a Dog podcast. When you join the Rescued by a Dog community on Patreon, your $5 a month will help me to continue sharing these moving stories. Today you're going to hear from Bill and James, whose home in Ketchikan, Alaska, was completely demolished in a landslide, with themselves and their dogs, Cassie and Alani, inside. Hi, Bill and James.
Hello.
And Bill and James's baby. Which baby is this?
Well, this one is Alani.
Bill and James, thank you so much for joining me despite what you're going through right now. I understand that you have a GoFundMe that's going to help you restore some of your costs, because my understanding is also that your insurance company has said they will not pay for the complete loss of your home due to it being a landslide.
Thank you for mentioning the GoFundMe.
Yeah, it's Support James and Bill's Recovery from Tragedy.
If people put in Bill and James Recovery from Tragedy, they'll find your GoFundMe? Yeah. Okay. And hopefully through this story, we can get you all some help that you need. And you will also be helping our listeners by sharing this incredibly warm-hearted story about your dogs. So to get us started, why don't you tell me, what are your dogs' names and what do they look like?
Yes. So Cassie, she's our oldest. She's an 8-year-old wire hair miniature dachshund, who's actually more of a silky than a wire hair, but she's a beautiful blonde, your basic long hair dachshund, and has all of the dachshund traits that you will find. She loves to cuddle. She's very affectionate, and she loves to eat.
Cute.
And her biggest thing is she loves to chase things, but as soon as they turn around and look at her, she comes running back, screaming at the top of her lungs, no matter what it is. So she did tree a bear, and once it got up the tree and it looked down at her, she
growled and she ran off. She's a great little girl. And then Cassie, Bill will tell you about Cassie. Alani. Bill will tell you about Alani.
Alani is 4 years old. Yes, I'm talking about you. And we got her in Las Vegas. So she's our lucky dog. She's a Maltese Shih Tzu mix.
About 10 pounds.
Yes. We like to think of her as a Malshi, but I love this joke, so bear with me. On bad days, this breed is called a Shih Tzus.
She has the typical Maltese face, the white with the touch of the tan cut through. And she's 4 years old. And the two of them are literally inseparable.
More so now than before the accident.
So Sunday, 2 weeks ago, we were just packing our last box and putting it out ready for the barge company to come pick it up Monday morning, because we had sold our house to close on the following Wednesday. And then Bill and I had purchased a house, or were purchasing a house in Puerto Rico. And we had just finished packing the last box and walking through the house and kind of saying goodbye to it and talking about how much I loved the house and I was going to miss it. And 20 minutes later, our lives turned inside out and upside down. There was a devastating landslide that took out 3 houses totally, one of them being ours. The house caved. It's a 3-story house. The house caved in and dropped top floor into the center floor into the basement. I was actually saved by our sofa. It threw me, when the house rolled
47 feet down the hill,
it threw me into the ceiling and back to the floor. And when it threw me back to the floor, when the ceiling collapsed, it collapsed on our sofa. I was at one end of the sofa and the dogs were at the other end of the sofa. I was cognizant of what was going on within a few moments. And I was calling out for Bill because I didn't see him. I hadn't heard anything from him. I was calling out for the dogs. I couldn't hear anything from the dogs. I was getting no response at all. I dislocated my shoulder and cracked 4 ribs. It took me about 20 minutes to get out, at which point, about 10 minutes into that, Bill responded to me, so I knew he was okay. But we still hadn't heard anything from the dogs. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. And we started at the beginning to fear for the worst. The first responders took over an hour to cut Bill out. He had dropped into the basement and was actually saved by our dishwasher, which created a bridge over where he was laying and protected him. We got out and were both taken to the hospital and asked the first responders, please go back in, please go back in. Our dogs are in there. You've got to go after our dogs. But the house wasn't safe enough to go into because it was still moving. The landslide was still active. And Bill and I spent the next 48 hours being taken care of, constantly questioning, has somebody gone to look for the dogs? And every time they would always say, well, we're doing what we can, we're listening, but we can't hear anything, and nothing like that.
And the EOC, the National Guard, etc., that had arrived said no.
We understood on the one side because of the safety for the first responders. And I think if any one of them had heard anything, it wouldn't have mattered. Matter of fact, I know that without a moment's hesitation, it would not have mattered. They would have gone into that house one way or the other if they had heard anything. But both of these girls were silent until the 7th day. They never said a word. Rick was in that house for an hour. Yeah, no sound.
Nobody can go in. No one will go in.
So on the 5th day, the chief fire marshal crawled through the house, took over an hour trying to work his way through the entire house. And nothing, no sound.
Yeah. Once we got to the 5th day without water, and then on Friday, when they told us no, we found nothing, I could not think of anything other than they had to have passed.
And Saturday, we kind of said our goodbyes to them and accepted the fact that we'd lost our kids. Yeah, it was an emotional goodbye. Then Sunday morning at 7 a.m., the first responder crew that was leaving, that does a roundabout of the area, heard a whimper. And they went crazy.
Everybody.
They just went crazy. So the crew that was leaving, they wouldn't leave. And the new crew that was coming on, they all merged on the house and they started crawling through every nook and cranny that they could get into and look into. And one of the first responders, what's her name? Crystal had a flashlight and she said, I see an eye, I see an eye.
But she didn't know if it was a live eye.
She didn't know if they were alive. And then she blinked and she goes, oh my God, it's one of the dogs. She blinked. So everybody started tearing in and moving wood and stuff out of the way so that they could get in. and she reached in to get Cassie, and Alani, being very protective, snapped at her, and she screamed, but she didn't scream from pain. She screamed saying, "They're both alive, they're both alive."
And Rick Hines called us
7 a.m.
very early, especially me. So when he called, I thought he was calling to say that they found the bodies. So I was preparing myself. I could overhear him talking through the phone, but he wasn't talking negatively. And he had a sparkle in his voice that suddenly I'm thinking positive. And when he said they're both alive, I could not retain myself and started crying hysterically, and I actually had to cover my head with a blanket to hide the sounds because we were at an Airbnb. By the time I figured out how to put my leg in my pants, we were out the door. So we were driving. I remember getting there and seeing everybody, but it was like we were in slow motion.
And all of them, all the first responders and firefighters and paramedics were all
standing around the dogs. They had been passing them back and forth.
Lined up, holding them. They called an ambulance to take us and the dogs to the vet. And it was just, it was so emotional for everybody. The entire city got a moment of joy.
It was the first good news anyone in the city had really heard for a week.
Just everybody was in tears. It was surreal is the best word to use, because it wasn't until we were actually seated in the ambulance holding them that it actually settled into the fact that, we're holding them and they're fine and they're trying to kiss us and, that sort of stuff. And 24 hours ago, we had laid them to rest mentally.
When we first came up to the dogs, they didn't seem to recognize us. And I found out later that's because each of the 13, 14 fire people that were there had passed them around, and they were just so excited to see people and to feel that there was love among them, that they were being passed to us, and it wasn't until they looked up in our eyes that they figured out who
we were. Yeah.
And how did you know they recognized you in that moment? What did they do?
Well, they lots of licks, lots of tongue up my nose, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they had been polite, gracious, and a little animated with all the first responders, but they just went ballistic when they realized that, this is Dad.
Yes. In fact, just a side note, someone told me 2 days ago that she had not seen me smile once until I was handed our dogs. And ever since, I've had a big smile on my face. So I know personally without them, I would not be carrying on well. So
we started getting phone calls because they broadcast it out over the news immediately, the local news here. And we started getting emails and texts and phone calls and people crying and carrying on. And they took us to the vet. The vet was amazed.
She was there waiting for us, opened the door. It was Sunday after, midday.
Yeah.
And
they're normally closed. And she was there and she was amazed at what good condition they were in. They had been found sitting on their spot on the other end of the sofa that had saved me, saved them. I couldn't see them because of the way the roof had fallen. But now, it's been a week later, and you wouldn't, other than they're a little gun shy, loud noises will startle them, and they're not quite as comfortable with strangers yet as they were. And they, like I said earlier, all of our dogs have slept with us. They sleep different now. They don't just sleep on the bed, but they Cassie has to touch me, and Alani has to touch Bill. They didn't just rescue us, they rescued this entire community. Everybody in Ketchikan. I mean, we have 8,000 people that live here, but I don't think that there's a single person in this town that wasn't lifted up that Sunday. Everybody we saw in the grocery store, 5, 6, 10 different people would stop us. Can we take a picture? Oh, you're the guys, they're the dogs, and can we pet them and that sort of stuff. My wife cried, or my mother cried. She was in tears for 10 minutes. To those of us that have had dogs or cats or animals in your life and are part of your life, they're an extension. We call them kids. We joke about it. They're our kids. And their family. And for a while there, part of our family was missing, and now it's whole again. I mean, we've lost everything, literally everything, except for our lives, the four of us. But that's what has kept us, I think, a little more sane, a little more centered, because there's somebody else to hang on to cuddle with at night. Now it's the bed's full instead of just the two of us. Everybody's there, and it centers you and it calms you.
If you can remember a day or a moment that was particularly happy with you two and both of your dogs, what were you doing in that moment?
It can be just a simple walk down to see the whales, or
that is such an Alaska thing to say. For most people, it's not a simple walk if you see whales, but that's hilarious.
Very true.
So, do they like to walk down to the water?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they do. They do.
And the ducks. And Alani, when she gets excited, if she knows, has picked up on the fact we're about to go for a ride or we're about to have dinner, whatever the scenario is, she loves standing up on her back feet and doing I don't know what to call it, where dogs do their two arms together.
You would think she was in the circus with the hat on, running around and on her back feet, and she just sits there and pats at you, going, come on, it's dinner, what are you doing? What are you waiting for?
When she wants attention, she will do twerking with her rear end.
She does. She twerks.
It's like she has Tourette's all of a sudden, because her rear end is not connected to the rest of her, and it just starts twerking. Almost in rhythm sometimes.
Kathy, if she wants something, she comes up and very much like a cat does. She'll bat at you. She'll hit you on the arm. She'll crawl up behind the sofa behind us and then whop you at the head.
She loves the window being down.
Oh, yeah.
And James didn't put down the window as soon as we got in the car. So she's over there taking her nails and scratching it on the plastic
and batting the window.
Going. And she'd look at him, put her paw back, scratch, look at him, and scratch.
If Cassie and Alani could understand human English, what would you like to say to them?
Thank you that you're okay. We're so blessed that you're okay.